Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. I'm Heather Campion, the CEO of the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library Foundation, and it's my great pleasure to welcome all of you to this library and to the 25th anniversary of the Profiles in Courage Award. Today, we celebrate the quality that President Kennedy most admired in public life, political courage in a very distinguished American. Please join me in welcoming to the stage the recipient of the 2015 Profile in Courage Award, Bob Inglis, and his wife, Mary Ann. Joining us, I'm also very proud to introduce President Kennedy's grandson and a member of our selection committee, Jack Schlossberg, and the Profile in Courage Award Committee Chairman, Al Hunt. It's now my great pleasure to introduce the chairman of the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library Foundation's Board of Directors, who gives endlessly of his time and his extraordinary talents to both this institution and to our country. Ladies and gentlemen, Ken Feinberg.
Thank you all very much. I want to welcome you here. It's always a beautiful day every year when we do this award. It's never bad weather. I don't know what that tells you about the importance of this award. We're honored and delighted to have everybody here today for one of this institution's greatest and most important traditions, celebrating 25 years of the Profile in Courage Award. A few people in particular should be mentioned at the outset. First, we're honored to have the grandson of President Kennedy, Jack Schlossberg, here. He's a member of our committee in choosing the awardee, and he'll present the award later this morning. Jack took time out from his final exams to be here, and he's assured me that he did not get a waiver, and he's got to get back to take the exam. So we're glad that he's here today. I want to give a very warm welcome to our honoree, Congressman Bob Inglis, and to his wife, Mary Ann, and also to their 5 children, Robert, Mary Ashton, Meade, Andrews, and McCullough. This family has come from all over the country to be here for their dad. Will the English children please stand up for a minute and let us say hello to you? The extended Inglis clan is here in force, and we're glad that they could be here today as well. I extend a warm welcome to some of our current and former Commonwealth officials. First and foremost, I want to thank our former U.S. Senator, who has been such an inspiration since the inception of the very idea of this library, former U.S. Senator Paul Kirk. I also want to thank Massachusetts Senate President Pro Tem Mark Pacheco and Massachusetts State Senator Jason Lewis. We thank you for being here today. We're also honored to have several members of the local diplomatic corps here today. Mrs. Graciela Gomez of Mexico, Mr. Masuro Aniya of Japan, and his wife, Mrs. Yukiko Aniya. Also with us, Alberto Mora, who received the Profile in Courage Award in 2006, and he knows the meaning of this award very, very well. We thank all of you and Mr. Mora for being here today. The library's board of directors, very important in the day-to-day functioning of this foundation, and we're grateful for their dedication and generosity. A few of them are here today: Mars Child, Adam Frankel, Mary Reed. Board members, would you stand, please, for the benefit of the board? We also thank our newly formed members of our Board of Advisors here at the Foundation who are with us, Scott Wright and Paul and Alberto Mora. Scott, we thank you for being here as well. Special thanks to Heather, our CEO of the Kennedy Library Foundation, the staff of the foundation, for all they do day in and day out for this institution. And also a special thanks to Tom Putnam, the director of the Kennedy Presidential Library and Museum, and his team, who worked so hard to make this institution sparkle and make it relevant in contemporary American life. And we thank Tom, Heather, the staffs for all they do. And I must say a special thank you to Ian Aaron. Ian, who is the director of all of what we do with the Profile and Courage Committee. She's the staff director of that committee. And Ian does an extraordinary job, and we thank Ian for her great work as well. This year, we received over 1,000 nominations for this award. 1,000. With us are three people who nominated the man we will honor today. They are Jonathan David Smith, who came from South Carolina to be here today, Kathy Buckley, who is a volunteer docent here at the Kennedy Library, and proving that there are limits to partisan politics, even in Washington, Perry Applebaum, who is the staff director and chief counsel for the ranking Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee. I thank all of you for your contributions in making this program possible today. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce the chairman of the Profile and Courage Award Committee, a chairman who for many, many years has led this committee with great humor, great wisdom, and great courage to show you how he leads by example. Our chairman of the Profile and Courage Committee, Al Hunt, last night was in Las Vegas at the fight. He took the red eye, and here he is this morning, our loyal chairman, Al Hunt.
Don't tell my wife I was at the fight. Thank you, Ken. It is my pleasure as the chairman of the Profile and Courage Award Committee to work with an incredibly distinguished group of men and women in selecting the recipients for the Profile and Courage Award. And I just would second what Ken said earlier. We are all carried by Ann Aaron, who just is one of the great staff people I've ever seen in my life. So thank you so much, Ann. The men and women on this committee their judgment, experience, and wisdom is indispensable to the process of electing the recipient. And quite a few of them are here today. Jack Schlossberg, who's going to get multiple introductions. Adam, who has been introduced before. David Shribman, Elaine Jones, Paul Kirk, Martha Minow. Would you all please just stand for a moment? In addition to selecting the very deserving and inspiring recipient of this year's Profile and Courage Award, we also choose the winner of the Profile and Courage Essay Contest for high school students. It's the Youth Companion program of the Profile and Courage Award. And the hope, and I think the realization now, is that the contest introduces a new generation of Americans to the concept of political courage and President Kennedy's book, and challenges young people to achieve excellence in research and writing by communicating a story of political courage to a wide audience. This year, 1,913 high school students representing all 50 states, we covered all 50 states, and the District of Columbia, submitted essays about U.S. elected officials who have demonstrated political courage. 87 judges worked through, now those of you who aren't from Massachusetts, just remember what you saw on your TV screens, worked through 4 snowstorms, 3 vigorous rounds of judging, eventually narrowing the pool to 10 essays. The Profile and Courage Award Committee made the final selection. And many of our essay contest judges are with us today, and I would invite you all to stand as we acknowledge the tremendous service you make to this award. Would the judges please stand? We owe a special debt of gratitude to John Hancock and the invaluable financial support it provides to make this program possible. We especially thank Tom Crohan and Kate Ardini, both of whom are here today. Tom and Kate, would you quickly stand? Thank you. It is now my pleasure to honor the winner of the 2015 Profile and Courage Essay Contest for high school students. Matthew Waltman is a junior at the Dwight Englewood School in Englewood, New Jersey. One of his older sisters, Emily, was a Profile and Courage Essay Contest finalist in 2012, and she encouraged younger brother to submit one too. Last year, he submitted an essay that advanced to the second round, but didn't quite make it to the top 10. He decided to give it another shot this year. From his home in Tenafly, New Jersey, Matthew discovered an act of political courage that took place in 2007 near the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. After an aggressive raid by immigration and customs agents, a meatpacking firm in Greeley, Colorado, the mayor of Greeley, Tom Selders, courageously took a stand for the dignity of all of that city's residents, including the undocumented. Convinced of the urgent need for national immigration reform, the mayor traveled to Washington, D.C. and spoke with congressional lobbyists about the terrible impact this raid had on his community. In the winning essay, Matthew recounts the backlash Selders faced when he returned home to face re-election. The two-term mayor paid the ultimate political price, losing his bid for another term in November in 2007. Matthew concluded his essay, and I quote, "Selders did more than exemplify political courage. He showed what it means to be an American and uphold the values that we, as a nation of immigrants, should hold dear." It is with great pleasure that I present this citation, accompanied by a monetary award of $10,000, to recognize Matthew's outstanding research and writing on the topic of leadership and courage, as described by President Kennedy in Profiles in Courage. Matthew, would you come up, please? Matthew's prize consists of a $5,000 cash award matched by another $5,000 cash prize from John Hancock. Matthew is joined by his parents, Peter and Naomi and his grandparents, Howard and Theodora. They deserve a round of applause too. Would they please stand? And you know, every student who submits an essay is required to have a nominating teacher, an educator who provides guidance and support during the research and the writing process. And we'd like to recognize John Deal, Matthew's nominating teacher, and thank him for the guidance he provided to Matthew. And we are pleased to award John Deal a John F. Kennedy Public Service Grant to encourage student leadership and civic engagement. John Deal. And one more note. As part of his research process, Matthew had hoped to conduct a personal interview with Tom Selders. He didn't quite get the chance. But we're going to change that today. You know, I feel like the host of that show, This Is Your Life, and you know, you bring that. We're going to change that today because Tom Selders has made the trip from Colorado to join us here at the John F. Kennedy Library. Tom, will you please stand up? We'd like to recognize your courage, too. We are thrilled by your example and your inspiration, and that you shared your story through Matthew's winning essay. And I want to thank all the essay participants and their families and their teachers and school administrators who made this year's program our best ever. It was really a marvelous effort, and we feel so good about it. Now, my final task up here is to introduce Jack Schlossberg. Ken noted earlier that he is now final exams at Yale. He's not there. Don't tell his mother. I don't want his mother to know that he's skipping his final exams. Jack, we told Bob Inglis this earlier. We didn't really earn our keep this year because this was so easy. It was so simple. But the driving force from the minute we sat down at that table was Jack Schlossberg. And I just think all of us here at the library who care so much about this great institution know that in John F. Kennedy's grandson, the future is secure. It is my pleasure to introduce Jack Schlossberg.
Thank you all for being here today. Thank you for that humble introduction, Al. I want to thank my fellow members of the Profile and Courage Award Selection Committee and everyone at the library who makes this day possible. Today is a great moment for the library and for my grandfather's legacy, but it's just one day of the year. The men and women who work at the library and those who generously give to this institution ensure that President Kennedy's legacy remains alive and vibrant here every other day of the year when there are no cameras here watching them, but when thousands of people from all across the country and around the world come to learn, reflect, and find inspiration. Since taking over my mother's old job as ambassador to Columbia Point, this award has become quite meaningful to me. Coming to this library, walking through the doors, past the pictures of my grandfather, smiling and sailing through the 60s, to sift through a slate of impressive candidates, each of whom made tremendous sacrifices for their country, to select the winner of this award reminds me that courage is not as rare as we might think, and that we ought to remind ourselves of the unsung profiles in courage that we encounter every day in our own lives. Every year for 25 years, the Kennedy Library has given this award. Each recipient has symbolized the ideals and principles of service and sacrifice that my grandfather embodied as an individual and as a president. But for me, this year is particularly special. I come to the library in a curious moment in my own life. If I pass my last exam on Tuesday morning, which is far from a safe bet, I will have completed my studies and I'll graduate later this month. I'll leave Yale and step out into a world that faces a greater challenge than any other before it: climate change. My generation has grown up with this disaster looming ahead. From the sidelines, we felt hopelessly frustrated as our leaders have failed to address this problem that we know exactly how to solve. Recently, as I thought about leaving Yale and stepping out into the world as it is today, I revisited my grandfather's commencement speech that he gave at Yale in 1962. It wasn't his best speech. It's really long and it's really boring. But for a Harvard graduate, I suppose that is to be expected. Two passages buried within caught my eye. And President Kennedy's words help explain the special significance of this year's award, and the profound importance of the courageous stand taken by the man sitting behind me. Speaking to the Yale crowd, President Kennedy said, "The great enemy of truth is very often not the lie, deliberate, contrived, and dishonest, but the myth, persistent, persuasive, and unrealistic." This holds true with respect to climate change. Most Americans don't believe the lie. A great majority believes that climate change is real. Yet inaction is justified by the myth that climate change is too large and daunting a problem to solve, that individual nations are powerless because every nation is culpable, and that no one person can make a difference. We challenge that view today by celebrating one man's courageous stand. A Republican congressman from South Carolina, Bob Inglis, had once rejected the idea that human behavior was altering the Earth's atmosphere. That changed when he traveled to Antarctica, where a group of scientists presented him with the evidence for man-made climate change. One defining quality of leadership and courage is the capacity to listen and to change. Bob deferred to these experts and to the undeniable evidence that he saw for himself. He had the courage to admit that he'd been wrong. Back at Yale in 1962, President Kennedy ended his speech with a call to action. He said, "There is a show in England called 'Stop the World, I Want to Get Off.' You have not chosen to exercise that option. You are part of the world and you must participate in these days of our years in the solution to the problems that pour upon us." Bob Inglis didn't want the world to stop or to get off of it. Bob Inglis did not neglect his responsibility. He chose to participate fully in these days of our years and to work for a solution. He recognized that climate change is only frightening if we choose to sit and wait and do nothing about it. He saw it as an opportunity for all of us to add a chapter to the story of American triumph and human progress. He went back to Washington and broke with his party when he publicly stated that climate change is real and America needs to do something about it. He proposed aggressive reforms, even though he knew that he would enrage his colleagues, his base, and special interests, but he summoned the courage to push ahead. For Bob, the truth certainly was inconvenient. In response for his stance on climate change, his party recruited a Tea Party candidate to challenge him in 2010 and drove him out of office. But this defeat didn't discourage Bob. He continued to fight for sweeping federal action on climate change, devoting himself to the Energy and Enterprise Initiative and working tirelessly to advocate for responsible reforms. Bob Inglis defines President Kennedy's vision of a profile in courage. My grandfather's legacy is kept alive by Bob's courageous decision to sacrifice his political career to demand action on the issue that will shape life on Earth for generations to come. It is my honor to welcome to the stage a man with vision, courage, and resolve, the winner of the 2015 Profile in Courage Award, Bob Inglis.
Thank you, Jack, for saying all those nice things. I can't imagine a more meaningful affirmation than a profile in courage. You know, from the writing we've done together, that I always dreamed of a part in Camelot. So to be here with you and in this place with the memories of a young American president on whom this country pinned so many hopes is an amazing thing. It's those hopes of a young America with a future before it that I wish to describe here today as a potential, bright, shining moment for climate change. On September 12, 1962, President Kennedy spoke at Rice University. Congress had approved his moonshot, and he was in Houston to inspect the progress at Apollo Mission Control. Sweltering in the September sun, because it was very hot that day, he started, "We meet in a college noted for knowledge, in a city noted for progress, in a state noted for strength, and we stand in need of all three. For we meet in an hour of change and challenge, in a decade of hope and fear, in an age of both knowledge and ignorance. The greater our knowledge increases, the greater our ignorance unfolds." Okay, so it doesn't sound quite the same in Southern. But applying those words to climate change, our knowledge has increased, our ignorance has unfolded, and we're beginning to see the damage that we're doing to the remnant of Eden in which we live. We wish to act, but our fears tempt us to deny what we see. We want it to be that we're not responsible, because responsibility brings guilt, and guilt without redemption brings paralysis. But what if there is redemption? What if there are solutions available to us? Having read Profiles in Courage in early college, I knew I always wanted to be one of those. I knew then, and I know even better now, that the future has a few leaders and a whole lot of followers. That when leaders are optimistic, they're saying they believe in the people that they represent. President Kennedy believed in us at Rice. He said that some of the materials needed for the spacecraft hadn't even been invented yet. And he admitted that some of what he was saying there at Rice was faith and vision. But he said, "The vows of this nation can only be fulfilled if we in this nation are first, and therefore we intend to be first." I had hoped to be as inspiring on climate change, in perhaps the reddest district and the reddest state of the nation. Apparently, I didn't do it quite as well as President Kennedy. In Landrum, South Carolina, in the darkest days of the Great Recession, there was a debate under a big tent. The tent wasn't quite big enough for climate change. The moderator, a local Christian talk radio host, asked me and my 4 Republican primary challengers if climate change was real, man-made, and whether we could support a bill in Congress that would tax carbon emissions. The crowd laughed audibly. It was well known that I had committed the heresy of believing in climate science. My 2008 primary opponent had nicknamed me the Al Gore of the Republican Party. He didn't mean it as a compliment. This is now the 2010 cycle, and we had descended into the depths of the Great Recession. People were upset. They would happily receive the news that climate change was one thing we just didn't need to worry about. My affirmative answers, that climate change is real and human-caused, and that free enterprise can solve the problem if we tax emissions with equal and offsetting cuts to payroll taxes, were not well received. All of my opponents answered the moderator's questions in the negative, advancing the populist rejectionism of the Great Recession, rejection of the science, rejection of all things Obama, and rejection more fundamentally of the notion that we can come together to solve really big challenges. I wasn't always so courageous on climate. In my first 6 years in Congress, 1993 to 99, I had said that climate change was hooey, Al Gore's imagination. All I knew was that Al Gore was for it, and therefore I was against it. After a 6-year hiatus doing commercial real estate law, I was reelected to Congress in 2004. Our son, the eldest of our 5 children, was voting for the first time that year. He came to me and said, "Dad, I'll vote for you, but you're going to clean up your act on the environment." That was step 1 of a 3-step metamorphosis for me. Step 2, I got on the House Science Committee and saw the wonders and the warnings of science in places like Antarctica. Step 3, I heard the call to love God and love people. People we will never know because they will come after us. Through Scott Heron, an Aussie climate scientist at the Great Barrier Reef. I came home and introduced an alternative to cap and trade, an emissions tax with equal and offsetting cuts in payroll taxes, together with a border adjustment that would impose a tax on imports. My political timing wasn't great, but I wouldn't change a thing. It's been a circuitous path, and one that I would not have chosen, but it's been a good path. Given a choice between the law of love and the law of politics, I know I chose the better. Those of us who are given this award for only sweat and tears are awed by those who have also bled. We can't match them. People like Congressman John Lewis of Georgia, a personal hero of mine, even though our voting records don't match up. And then there are other awards for those who have bled and died. Servicemen and women who gave the last full measure of devotion, and public servants whose departures were not of their own making. Their impact was not only for their own times. One of them said, "What we need in the United States is not division. What we need in the United States is not hatred. What we need in the United States is not violence and lawlessness, but is love and wisdom and compassion toward one another and a feeling of justice toward those who still suffer in our country." That was Senator Bobby Kennedy in 1968 announcing the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. If we succeed on climate change, if we apply love and wisdom and compassion, our impact will be like his and President Kennedy's, not only for our own times. For what we do now will determine the future. I realize that some of my friends say, "No, you're arrogating to humankind control over God's creation." But isn't ours the same God who has said to us, "I've set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Therefore choose life, that you and your descendants may live, loving the Lord your God, obeying his voice, and cleaving to him, for that means life to you and length of days. I set before you blessings and curses, the blessing of loving and providing for those who will come after us, the curse of not caring, the blessing of winning the future, the curse of missing the opportunity to lead, the blessing of risking a seat in Congress to explain what will become obvious while it's still appearing as novel and courageous, the curse of eking out re-election and losing the ability to face your children and children's children. For me, their love, their affirmation is worth more than a voting card in Congress. And since they have the greater claim on the future, they challenge us, don't they? They ask us, when are you going to do it? When is America going to rise to the challenge on climate change? Well, I think it's soon. I think it's before the decade is out. I think we're going to come together and get this done because I believe that a pricing of carbon dioxide will be akin to what someone said of the financial crisis in 08-09. It's amazing how the impossible went to the inevitable without ever passing through the probable. The solution will come when we tame the tribalism that's developed on climate change. When tribes are under pressure, as we were in the Great Recession, adherence to tribal orthodoxy gets to toxic levels. In such times, it's dangerous but good to take the advice of a Palestinian businessman I met in Gaza. God gave us two eyes, he said, one to see from the perspective of another. When a member of Congress gets elected by his tribe and goes to Washington, he gets used to hearing the arguments of the other tribes. His blood pressure no longer rises when he hears their point of view. And he runs the risk of being detected and ruled heretical by the keepers of his tribe's orthodoxy. He has a choice to make. He can slam himself up on the right-hand wall, or if he's a liberal, on the left-hand wall, or extend a hand from that wall and try to reach to the other side. If tribalism has its weaknesses, it must also have some strengths. Tribes give us an identity. They help us interpret the world. They help us process the information and make decisions and judgments on the basis of shared values. So let's use that strength. Dare we stipulate that each of the tribes has some strengths to offer? Dare we go beyond the zero-sum game of grudging compromise and rise to creative collaboration? Dare conservatives ask, can free enterprise solve climate change? Dare progressives imagine a more efficient solution than a regulatory solution? Dare Republican presidential candidates to break out of the disbelief of the Great Recession, the agnosticism of I'm not a scientist, and the defeatism of we can't do it, we're not China, it will hurt our economy. Dare they answer the question with, you bet free enterprise can solve climate change. Dare the environmental left leave aside the naming and shaming for a cycle and let conservatives come back to themselves as people who accept science. Dare conservatives of faith, like me, celebrate the science. Dare we believe that our faith is affirmed by science, not challenged by it. To quote a very underquoted line from President Kennedy's speech at Rice, I think we're going to do it. The impossible will become the inevitable without ever passing through the probable. United, there is little we cannot do in a host of cooperative ventures, President Kennedy said in his inaugural address. Divided, he said, there's little we can do, for we dare not meet a powerful challenge at odds and split asunder. We dare not face the challenge of climate change at odds and split asunder. Our scientists and economists can supply solutions that fit with our values. They're just waiting for our hearts to tell them to do so. Let's dare to love. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, before we adjourn, I'd like to ask Jack and Bob to gather here for one more photo with the award and one more generous round of applause. Please stay seated. Thank you. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we invite you to join the celebration today at a reception just behind you in this beautiful pavilion. Thank you all very much.